Welcome to Dark Dreams.
I say every house in America should have an electric chair. And every man just once in his life should sit in it, just so that he can feel the power of millions of gallons of electricity flow through his veins. I got an electric chair, that's all I need. You get an electric chair, Sheldon, you don't have to worry about the audience. You get an electric chair, you can tell them anything you want, as long as it's real. You get yourself an electric chair and they'll sit there all night long. Kind of a funny idea, sitting in an electric chair and doing a show. Well, think of the therapeutic value of the electric chair and all the money it is. Yes, an electric chair in every home.
The Electric Chair, a show about horror. ElectricChairShow.com.
An electric chair. Wow.
20 Reasons to Leave and 1 to Stay by Richard Thomas. Because, in the beginning, it was the right thing to do, staying with her, comforting and holding her, while inside I was cold and numb, everything on the surface an act, just for her. Because I couldn't go outside, trapped in the empty expanse of rooms that made me twitch, echoes of his voice under the eaves and in the rafters, because she still hid razor blades all over the house, because I wasn't ready to bare myself to the world, willing to pour more salt into the wounds, because of the dolls, and the way she held them to her bare breasts, the way she laughed and carried on, 2 dull orbs filling her sockets, lipstick on her face, hair done up, but the rest of her like marble, to go with her porcelain children that watched from his bed, defiling it, making a joke of it all. Because at one point in our past, she saved me from myself, the simple act of showing up. Lasagna filled my apartment with garlic and promise, when all I could do was fall into a bottle. Because I kept hoping he would walk in the door, backpack flung over his shoulder, eager to show me his homework, the worlds he had created with a handful of crayons. Because it was my fault, the accident, and we both knew it. Because if she was going to die a death of 1,000 cuts, one of them wouldn't be mine. Because tripping over a Matchbox car, I found myself hours later curled up in a ball, muttering and listening for his response. Because she asked me to, and I hadn't learned to say no to her yet. Because she wanted to live in any time but this time, jumping from one era to another, bonnets and hoop skirts, wigs and parasols, and I allowed it. Because when I held her in the black void that was our bedroom, pressing my body up against hers, part of me believed I was a sponge, soaking up her pain. It was fake voodoo, but it was all that I had. Because I had no love left for anyone in the world. Because I didn't want to go. Because it was still my home, and not simply a house yet. Because I wasn't done talking to my son, asking him for forgiveness. Because I didn't believe that we were done, that our love had withered, collapsed and fallen into his casket, wrapping around his broken bones, covering his empty eyes. Because I didn't hate her enough to leave. Because I didn't love her enough to leave. Because every time she looked at me, she saw him, our son, that generous boy, and it was another gut punch bending her over, another parting of her flesh, and I was one of the 1,000, and my gift to her now was my echo. The Girlfriend. by Pauline Ramsey. 1, 2, 3. Yes, more need to be pulled through. The work was tedious, but he diligently kept going until his fingers ached from the constant threading of the eye of the needle. He had to pull it closer together, otherwise the workmanship would look shoddy. No one would ever think that she would be beautiful again if he did a poor job of making her look gorgeous. In her newfound state, no one would want her. No one, of course, except him. No, she must be perfect. He remembered when he first laid eyes on her. She was the most beautiful creature he ever came across. Her feminine curves drew his eyes to the lusciousness of her body. In his mind's eye he pretended that he was touching the silky smooth white skin of hers, and he was tasting it beneath his lips. He watched her from a few stacks back. Luckily for him, the bookshelves didn't quite conceal her from his vision. He was able to watch her as she skimmed the back cover of a tasteless romance novel. He never completely understood a woman's attraction to Harlequin books. Personally, he felt like someone would be setting him or herself up for disappointment, especially if the men in reality weren't anything like they were portrayed in those books. He always thought of those books as being in the same category as fantasy novels, where the fictional characters have these fantastic adventures and romances that would, or rather could, never exist in the real world. All in all, in his humble opinion, it was a pretty pointless reading list. Despite her genre of choice, the woman was quite breathtaking and held his attention fully. He tried to guess her name. She looked like a Rachel to him, despite that she may have had a more exotic name to go with those exotic features. She twirled her long, blonde locks between her fingers as she picked up another book. A brief flash of fantasy flooded before him as he imagined that she was using that same delicate touch on his cock. He could feel himself becoming aroused by the thought, and so, unfortunately, pushed the thought to the back burner. More and more stitches are needed. She isn't even close to complete yet. As he stared after her from his hiding place in the horror section of the small bookstore and coffee shop, he wondered if she had a man that claimed her. He wanted her, and have her be his and only his. The thoughts that collided into his mind were irrational, yet he couldn't help but think them just the same. This woman had him obsessing over her, and he had never even spoken a word to her. Pushing aside thoughts of possible rejection from his mind, he placed the book he was looking at back onto the shelf. He ran his fingers through his dark hair and straightened his shirt so he could look presentable. He was raised to believe it was uncalled for to have a man approach a woman of her stature, looking like a complete slob. He was by no means an ugly man. He was tall, with a great physique and a winning smile. His hair was dark and styled so that it resembled a bit of a punk look, and his chocolate-brown eyes seemed to grab a woman's attention effortlessly. Despite his good looks, he wasn't always the handsome man he was now. When he was growing up, he was obese, with large, dark-rimmed glasses and pimples covering about 90% of his face. It wasn't until after he graduated from high school that he was able to lose the weight, clear up his horrible acne, and be able to afford to get laser eye surgery. Even though he grew into his looks, he suffered greatly from lack of social skills when it came to approaching women. He had a couple of girlfriends, but they never stuck around long enough while he was in college. He was often rebuked of any advances when it came to asking women out, because he oftentimes tripped over his words. Now that he thought about it, it had been nearly 2 years since he last had a girlfriend. If this woman rejected him, it would just be another one on the huge growing pile started long before high school. The light hurts his eyes as he continuously works on his project. He quietly walked around the couple of stacks that separated him from his dream girl. Nearing her, he could smell the delicate floral-scented perfume she used. He picked up a random book title from the romance section and read the back of the book. Of course, it was a novel about a southern belle looking for love in all the wrong places. He must have possessed a sort of sour look on his face because the woman next to him caught his attention fully. "I see that romance isn't quite to your taste, huh? Let me guess. I'd say you were more of a horror buff, am I right?" she asked him in a lyrical and sweet, lilting voice. He looked into her blue eyes that gleamed like pools of moonlight, and her dazzling white smile instantly won his heart. Her giggle made his heart jump, and he could feel the queasiness of butterflies in his stomach. His face grew hot as he looked at her, and he could tell that he was blushing. He silently kicked himself for being so lame, and blushing in front of a gorgeous woman like herself. He couldn't believe that he was making such an ass out of himself before even opening his mouth. He laughed nervously. "Yeah, a friend of mine recommended this book to me. I don't think I'll be reading it any time soon." He put the book back into its rightful spot and asked her, "How did you know I like horror?" She laughed again, and when she did, her hair fell into her eyes. She wiped it away with a small and insignificant gesture, but for him it was like she was sensually caressing herself. She smiled at him and told him, "Lucky guess, I suppose. I'm pretty good at knowing what people like to read." She laughed again, and he couldn't help but to find the lovely sound infectious. She extended her hand for a shake, and told him her name was Janelle. "Michael," he said in return, and shook her hand before discovering his palm was sweaty. Michael pulled his hand away, and while she sat her book down, he took the opportunity to wipe it on his jeans before she turned her attention toward him again. Before he could offer his apology to her, she told him, "Pleased to meet you, Michael. Would you like to grab a cup of coffee with me?" She was coming along nicely now. 1, 2, 3. Yes, yes! More stitches were needed. He found himself floored by her direct invitation, but he admitted to himself silently that he was relieved that she had made the first move. They ordered a couple of lattes and sat in the corner of the small dining area while they chatted away for what seemed like hours. The flirting continued throughout the entire conversation. Michael watched as she waved her hands to and fro to emphasize a point that she was making. He found her to be quite entertaining. As it neared closing time, Janelle told him that she had a wonderful time talking with him. She then pulled out a scrap of paper and pen from her purse. She scrawled something onto it, kissed his cheek briefly, and told him to call her. As he watched her run off to her car, he stood on the street corner, musing after her. She had stolen his heart, lock, stock, and barrel. It had been a couple of days since he met her at the bookstore. He kept thinking about Janelle's curves, her smile, those small and yet ample breasts that he noticed peeking out the top of her shirt when they met. He thought about her while he furiously worked himself to orgasm after orgasm. He cradled the phone in his right hand and looked at the number she left him with in his left. He debated on whether or not he should call her. He was nervous about it, but after a few moments more of deliberation, he finally started to punch in the numbers. He took in a deep breath and exhaled loudly as he tried to calm his nerves. 1 ring, 2 rings. Finally, just before the third started, Janelle answered. "Hello?" the woman asked. Michael tried to get his voice working again. She repeated herself, and he was finally able to stammer out, "Hello? Janelle? Yes, this is she." "Hi, it's Michael from the bookstore," he was able to get out. "Oh, yes, I remember. How are you, Michael?" she asked him excitedly. He imagined that she was twisting the phone cord in her fingers. Oh, I'm good. I was wondering if maybe you'd like to go out to dinner tonight." Michael used the sleeve of his shirt to wipe the sweat that had begun collecting on his brow. He held his breath until she told him, "Sure, I'd love to go to dinner. What time should I be ready by?" "How does 8 o'clock sound?" he asked her. "Sounds good." He could hear the smile in her voice. After a few minutes of small talk, Janelle gave her home address to him and told him that she'd see him soon and that she was looking forward to meeting again. Michael tried to think of a way to spend his evening until it was time to pick up Janelle and head to the restaurant. He finished up the projects he brought home from the office just in time to start getting ready for his date. He showered, shaved, and picked out a pair of black slacks and a medium blue dress shirt with a dark blue tie. He checked himself over in the mirror. He thought he looked pretty good, and before leaving his house he splashed some cologne on. Michael walked down the stairs to get to the parking garage. He turned the engine, and with directions in hand, he headed to Janelle's house. "She'll be beautiful. Just wait and see. When he finished her up, she'd be more than what she once was." The entire evening went smoothly, even from the first hello at her front door, right down to the very last goodbye when he dropped her off. He stood in front of her door with her, and wasn't sure what to do next. He wanted to kiss her, but before he had the chance to make up his mind, she leaned forward and planted a soft kiss on his lips. She thanked him for a wonderful evening and bade him good night. Michael left her place, with his head swimming, and he knew that he would make her his girl. It would only take a little bit more time before she would be, but in that little time he could plan the right way to woo her. The happy couple celebrated their 1-year anniversary. They did everything together, from hanging out at the local pub to going on vacations and trips. They spent their free moments parading about and having a blast, and it didn't take long before she became the light of his life. From the very first moment he saw her, his love for her grew to great heights. He missed her while she was at work, or while she was out with her friends and family. She became his everything. Despite all the goodness in the relationship and how well it seemed to be going, Michael began to notice little things that seemed off. For instance, she began to stay at work later. At first, he didn't really think anything about it, due to the fact that her job sometimes required putting in overtime. However, when it became nearly a daily thing, it set off a bell for him. She started going out a lot more. She'd tell him that she was going out with the girls, and that she'd be back late, but sometimes she wouldn't come home at all. She'd tell him that it was because she had gotten too drunk to be able to drive herself safely home. There were the few occasions when he'd go see her, when she was working late, to bring her something to eat for dinner, but when he got there he was always met with the same answer when he inquired about her: "She's already gone home." By that time, of course, he had been waiting hours for her to show up at his place so they could do something together. After several weeks of this behavior, he soon began to doubt her when she made up excuses of where she had been when he tried to find her. He tried calling her house phone. A lot of times there was no answer. The same thing occurred when it came to calling her cell phone. He knew that he was getting the brush off. She had even gone as far as telling him that she had family emergencies and that her car had broken down a few times. Of course, by this point he no longer believed her. He suspected that she found herself another lover. It wasn't until he decided to go over to her apartment one night to see if she were home that he learned his suspicions were correct. He found the door locked and used the key that she had given him to let himself in. He walked into the living room, and when he entered, he could hear the moans of a woman having sex. He followed the noises to the bedroom. The door was slightly ajar, and he could see a man pumping into Janelle fiercely, as her face showed clear signs of pleasure. He could hear that sigh of ecstasy that she often purred for him. To hear her use it with another man made his blood boil. He turned back to the living room and sat on the couch, waiting for her excursions to finish. He listened as the unknown man let out a loud groan as he climaxed, and he could hear the quiet nuances of conversation between his girlfriend and her new lover. Michael just sat there, silently waiting for his chance to make his presence known to her. It didn't take long before he heard the bedroom door open fully, and for the man to come out into the living room, all the while telling Janelle that he had to get home to his wife. Michael just sat there on the couch in the dark and watched the stranger speed past him without a passing glance. Her lover must not have seen him sitting so quietly and patiently in silence. Stitch by stitch, she was being turned into something beautiful. Soon she would be more entrancing than the first time he saw her. No one would ever forget her beauty when he finished his work. After a few more minutes, Janelle came out of the bedroom wearing a large flannel shirt. Michael knew it wasn't one of his. He never wore flannel. He found it to be a tacky pattern, a bit too much redneck for his liking. He suspected that she was still nude beneath the shirt. Like her lover, she didn't see him sitting in the dark, quietly waiting for her. She meandered into the kitchen, and after turning on the light, she finally saw him. By the expression on her face, she knew that she had been caught. He sat there, sitting like a statue, and she wondered how long he had been in the apartment. She didn't know if he had been there long enough to know that she was with someone else. Janelle walked over in front of him, wringing her hands together while her delicate fingers turned red with each harsh grasp. Michael could tell she was on the verge of tears as she stared blankly at her. She felt numb, but not the comfortably numb a person gets when drinking or doing something fun and pleasurable. No, this was the kind of numbness that was cold, calculating, and buried deep within his chest. "Michael, what are you doing here?" she asked fearfully. He just rubbed his hand across his chin and looked at her. The gesture made her shrink further into herself mentally, but not physically. "Well, I came to see how you were doing since you haven't been coming over as much as you used to. You don't answer your phones. You claim that you're at work or out with the girls, and yet I find you here fucking someone behind my back." He could feel the rage building inside of him as he continued to look at her. How dare she go around cheating on him? He gave her everything that he could possibly give her, yet it wasn't good enough for the tramp. He tried to control his anger, to listen to her explanation about her behavior. Tears started falling down her cheeks as his anger got the best of him, and he demanded to know why. While asking her, her gaze dropped from his, and when she looked back up at him, she stammered out the syllables. "I don't want to be with you anymore." Defiance and fear penetrated her eyes and mirrored into his own. Michael had the distinct knowledge that her feelings for him were fading, but he thought that perhaps it was because they had grown used to each other. However, after tonight, he knew now that it was because she was fucking someone else. He wasn't good enough for her anymore. Certainly not good enough to satisfy her. He asked her again why she was going behind his back. Why did she want to get out of the relationship? She told him that she wanted the relationship over, and claimed she no longer loved him. She started to shake uncontrollably, as her words resonated from deep within her. Michael stood from the couch, made his way to the kitchen, and merely stated, "Damn, I need a drink." She followed him, but remained a safe distance away, unsure of what he might do. He poured himself a small glass of whiskey found on top of the refrigerator. He quickly gulped down the drink and felt the burn travel down his throat. It was a delicious burn. He looked up at her and asked her to come to him. She peered at him fearfully, wondering to herself if it was a good idea or not. He told her that he wanted just one last embrace, one last kiss, and then he'd let her go forever. Hesitantly, she walked over to him, thinking it best to give him what he wanted, so she could be free of him. She slowly wrapped her arms around him as he embraced her tightly in his arms. As he brushed his lips against hers, he could feel her apprehension. Still, she yielded to his kiss. He kissed her sweetly and gently, as he reached before him to grab a kitchen knife perched by the sink. He watched her through small slits to make sure his actions weren't detected, and he could tell she was lost in the kiss. He guessed she was probably imagining her new lover. He brought his arm around her once more and gave her one last squeeze before he lifted the knife and shoved it into her back. Her eyes flew open at the sudden bolt of pain as the knife made contact. He pulled the knife free and stabbed her again, and again, and again. He kept his mouth over hers so that she couldn't let out a scream. Repeatedly the knife slid into her, as if she were butter. She sank to the floor, and the only sound she made now was the ghastly gurgle that escaped her lips. Michael knelt over her, grabbed a fistful of her hair, and when she knew what he was going to do next, her eyes bulged pleadingly. He dragged the blade across her neck and watched her bleed out. It would only be a matter of a few short moments before she was dead. In his rage and jealousy, he continued to cut her. He slashed her arms and legs, made long cuts along her abdomen, and cut off her breasts. He even went as far as to shove the knife inside her vagina as she lay dead on the cold linoleum floor. No one was going to take her away from him. No one. Michael kept slashing and cutting at her until his anger was finally spent. He looked down at her and discovered what a mess he had made. "Tisk, tisk, Janelle. Now your precious lover won't want you, will he?" he thought to himself, and chuckled at the idea of it. All that was left to do now was to clean up the evidence. Not because he really wanted to conceal it. No, he wanted to make her whole again. He ventured to a nearby linen closet close to the bathroom and found a sewing kit she used on a few occasions when he tore a hole in his jeans or was missing a button from a shirt. He brought it back over to her and opened it up. Thankfully, there was enough thread to do the task he planned. He smiled to himself as he looked down upon her. She was his, and no one was ever going to take her from him. Not now. Not ever. He held the needle close to his eye and almost expertly threaded it. He looked down on Janelle again, looked into her cold, dead eyes, and asked her, "Where should I start, darling?" He laughed out loud and figured putting her breasts back in their rightful position would be the best way to start. 1 stitch soon became 2, 2 soon became 3, and so on and so forth. The work was tedious and meticulous, but he wanted to make sure she was perfect. Not for another lover, no. She needed to be perfect for him. He didn't want the love of his life looking like a travesty, but wanted her to possess her newfound beauty. He wanted the kind of glory that would forever be remembered by all. It had taken him nearly until dawn to finish his task. She was beautiful again. Her eyes were sewn shut, as were her lips. She reminded Michael of a rag doll for a young girl. He dragged her into the bathroom and laid her into the tub. He pulled the shower head down from the stall, and with a wet rag filled with soap, cleaned the dried blood from her skin. It took more than a half hour before he finally had her skin and hair clean and fresh. He turned off the faucet, let her air dry while he went back to the kitchen to clean the blood from the linoleum. That was a bit of a hard task for him. He went to the linen closet again, grabbed a mop, scrub brush, and bucket. He set to work, and it took him the better part of another hour before he was finished scrubbing the congealed blood. Michael took care of the supplies and bloody water before going back to Janelle. He pulled her out of the tub, careful not to pull the stitches he worked so hard on. He carried her to the bedroom. Lucky for him, he had the strength to lift dead weight, although it was still difficult to maneuver around. He lay her gently on the queen-size bed. After making sure she was settled, he walked to her dresser and pulled out his favorite negligee. He slipped it over her head and placed her back into the rumpled sheets, pulled the little gown further down. He went back to the dresser and grabbed the perfume she loved and sprayed it delicately on her cold skin, making sure to spritz a bit on her neck and collarbone. He could smell the delicate floral scent invade his nostrils. He inhaled and savored it. When she was finished, he stripped out of his own dirty and bloody clothes and lay down next to the woman that still held his heart. He lay his head in the crook of his left arm and draped the right over Janelle's cold body. Leaning forward, he kissed her dead, stitched lips. Even death could not dissipate the glory and beauty of what she once was. As the echo of her laughter and words of love played in his memories, he breathed a content sigh and fell asleep. It took several days of unreturned phone calls and Janelle not showing up for work before someone filed a missing persons report. There were occasional knocks at the door, but Michael never bothered to answer them. He wanted to be alone with her. He didn't want anyone to come and take her away from him. On the final day of his freedom, he lay against her sleeping. He had gotten used to the smell of her quickly decomposing body, and when small slabs of flesh began to slough off, he'd stitch them back into place. Janelle was looking more and more as days went by, like the rag doll she was turning into. Knocks came at the door. This time a voice shouted, "Police!" When no one answered, they busted down the door and quickly searched the apartment. Michael lay next to Janelle, sleeping soundly, as he dreamed of kisses he once shared with her. The cops that first came onto the scene looked at the atrocious display that lay upon the bed. One of the rookies lost his lunch long before entering the room, from the smell of decomposing flesh. They roused Michael from his sleep violently, handcuffed him, and carried him away to jail. They thought that he was sane enough to tell the detectives what happened, and why he had done the things he had done to his girlfriend. All Michael told them was, 1, 2, 3, yes, more stitches are needed. The glazed look in his eyes during the interrogation, and the mumbling of that same phrase over and over again, was enough to tell them that the man was truly gone from reality and could not be held accountable for the crime he committed. Michael was sentenced to life in a mental institution for the criminally insane, where he could be kept under constant surveillance. Most times, one would only have to look at his camera to see him pacing back and forth in his little cell, always mumbling, 1, 2, 3, Yes, yes, more stitches are needed.
The thread of life is getting extremely thin, my dear sisters. Humanity's tapestry is once again becoming threadbare. If we do not find a way to help them soon, I'm afraid they may all die. We will have to descend down into the underworld once again until humanity has regained their balance.
Verdandi, no. I don't want to go to the underworld again. It stinks there. We must weave their fate stronger. They must survive. Can you whisper to the humans of their fate? If I am to go into the underworld, they are to come with me.
There are powerful female humans down there who interlace the future of many. I have seen it cut in their poles of destiny. Many humans deserve to have their threads cut off. Perhaps another purge is what they need in order to come together once again.
My sisters, word. The past has proven itself. Humans will continue to find ways to destroy themselves. I have seen it in the present. Many humans are trying to protect one another, but power, greed, and hate consumes them. It is ruining our beautiful tapestry. I also do not particularly care for the smell of the underworld.
Then what do you suggest, Verdandi?
What is one of the things which unites humans the most? A great disaster.
Yes, yes, this is truth that you speak. Humans always come to the aid of others. When a catastrophe strikes, they send aid from all over the world to help one another. That is exactly what we need.
But would that be enough to save them? And keep us from descent into the underworld?
An excellent question, my sweet little sister. I believe the three of us together could create incredible apocalyptic situations for our female humans. For it is with them the power to survive and to continue their species.
In the past, we have provided them with plagues, floods, and witch hunts. Those were nice. What could we throw at them now to help join healing energies and find themselves once again?
Weird, we can't kill them all. Otherwise we'll have to wait for another evolution.
Of course not, dearest Skuld. We wouldn't want to sabotage their precious future. Cull out the impudence, I say.
Why don't we let the wickeds decide for us? They'll know how to handle this.
Yes, yes. We can give them the precious yarns of life to weave humanity's horror story. They can decide their own fate.
That's a superb idea. I think we'll need to provide them with a few helpful suggestions to ensure their survival.
I like it. What a delicious way to create chaos. The winning disaster will be their ultimate demise.
Or their ultimate survival. Each woman has the ability to influence her fate based on what she's experienced in the past.
Skuld, you are too much of an optimist for me. I hate the smell of rotting snails that the underworld offers. I'm not going back. I'm ready to cut their threads and end their lives. Get rid of the weak ones, I say.
Verdandi, how do we find these powerful wicked women to craft a tale of survival in an impossible situation to help fortify the tapestry of their existence?
It's quite simple, really. All they have to do is email to www.challenge2013@gmail.com. And in the body of the email, they can include their name, a short bio of themselves, and a headshot in order to enter the challenge.
I'm in a hurry. When do they need to send this in? I don't want to step 1 foot into the underworld if I don't have to. The smell, it's just, I don't even want to think about it.
Oh, we have time, my sisters, but the sooner our wicked women writers submit, the longer they'll have to craft their tales of doom. Official cutoff date for submissions is June 20th. Voters shall decide their fates by October 19th, and we will have our 2013 Most Wicked Woman Writer. She, and only she, will determine how the world brings upon its own apocalypse.
And right before All Hallows Eve, too. How very fitting. Let's make this unusually interesting, shall we? I say we provide the entrance, the disaster, and an inconvenient location.
And at least one item to help them out in their horrific situation. We must give them a fighting chance.
Indeed. Compelling. What if we give them an untimely disability?
Yes, yes. Life is never convenient. Why should the apocalypse be any different?
Agreed?
Agreed.
By the blood of we three, let release the fears that be. Once again, in order to choose Earth's ultimate demise and to bring the hearts of humanity together once again in peace and love, we need you to send us your name, short bio, and a headshot to www.challenge2013@gmail.com. Please put 2013 How Will You Survive entrant in the subject line. Then, once we have all of our victims...
You mean entrance?
Yes, right. Entrance, I mean. We will roll the runes to decide who gets what apocalyptic disaster, location, their helpful item, and...
their untimely disability.
Hurry now. Those who enter will receive their roll of the runes. Then, and only then, will be revealed their apocalyptic situation. Those who dare enter early will have the most time to craft their story. Take care, and good luck. Please survive. We really do not wish to go back down into the underworld. Nothing kills the smell.
Who shall be the most wicked 2013?